Good evening, everyone. Once again, we have gathered here back to get into our next new session of Polaris Talks, where we'll be continuing our academic sessions on general anatomy. So, as mentioned before, we have both of our resource persons today, where Dr. Sanjit Bajpayee, Chief Academic Officer of Dr. Polaris, would be taking up the session for you, followed by which Dr. Ryan Fernandez, Medical Director at Dr. Polaris, would be giving a lot of insight about the session through clinical or other scenarios as such. So, both of you, sirs, a very warm welcome to you both. I hope both of you are doing great.
Yeah, thank you, Aishwarya.
All right. Good to know that. So I'll not waste much of your time, sirs. Over to Sanjit, sir, for today's session.
Great. So, very warm welcome to all of you, all the students gathered today evening. And what we are going to do is have one of the topics, which is one of the most scared topics. At the same time, it is one of the most boring topics. Okay. But I assure you that by the end of this webinar, what exactly anatomy of skin means, you will be taking home. Okay. So how we will read anatomy is very different by the way textbooks teach. Okay. This is what we follow. How we are going to read skin is not through text, is not through the textbook language. What we are going to see, what we are going to read. This is what skin is all about. Skin is the organ which you need to see more rather than memorizing or rather than flipping pages. Okay, you just need to see these images and create that image inside your head, and then after that you will get all your answers. So this will be a pictorial kind of a presentation which will give you a lot of answers to a lot of things which happen to you in general life. Why do you tan? Why do you blush? Why do you have pain? Why do you touch something and feel it? This is all related to skin, right? So it is one of the most important organs as well as the largest organs of the human body. So let's see skin and its appendages. What this particular topic is all about, right? Now, when we see the skin, right? So, is my pointer visible?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay, fine. Right. So, when we see the skin, reading of the skin comes under one system that is called as integumentary system. Now, what do you mean by the word integument? Integument literally means covering which is present outside the body. That's called as integument. Now, when we read this as a system, we call it as integumentary system. So this integumentary system contains the largest organ, that is skin, as well as its appendages. Now, what is an appendage? Appendage is something that is present with an important organ. That is a side thing that is present with an important organ. That's called as an appendage. Okay. So what we can see here, we have a skin. Together with that, we have some kind of hair. That is an appendage. Together with that, we have some glands. That is also an appendage. And together with that, we have some kind of fat. We have some kind of vessels. We have some kind of glands, all interspersed around in the skin. So they all form together the integumentary system. Okay, it's just not the skin. It is side appendages also which constitute this integumentary system. Okay, fine. Now we move on to what is the function of skin. So whenever you ask this particular topic, the first thing that comes in my mind, why do I have skin over my body? Okay, why am I just not having muscles and bones? Because my function of the skin is separate. So you have got a mnemonic here. The skin gives you very important 5 principal functions. And this can be remembered in the form of prism. The first is production. Now, what does the skin produce? Skin produces a very important vitamin that is called as vitamin D. Okay, that is cholecalciferol. So production is one of the very important things that the skin does. It constitutes one of the major sources of vitamin D. That is the first P. Comes R. R means it is a regulator. Now, just as you have a regulator for your refrigerator as well as your air conditioners, you have even got a regulator for your own body. And what exactly needs to be regulated? 2 things need to be regulated. One is temperature. Second is secretions. So skin is brilliantly designed in a way in which when I have cold outside, my body will make sure that I feel warm. And when everything is warm outside, the body will not let me feel hot. And that is the reason it is This is called as thermoregulation, regulation of temperature that is also done by the skin with the help of blood vessels. Now, I'm going to tell you later on why these blood vessels come into play. The next thing that a skin does is regulation of these secretions. Now, the skin has a particular function of secreting. So what does it secrete? It secretes something oily. Okay, it secretes something like what you have called as sweat. These all things are also very important. We are going to see that what exactly this production is all about. So regulation of temperature as well as secretion is the R. I is immunity. So skin also protects you. Skin, as we discussed in the previous topic, you must remember that we discussed about some immune cells. So these immune cells are also underneath the skin. So any foreign invader or pathogen which is sitting on top of the skin cannot gain its entry until and unless it breaks our barrier of immunity. That is how our skin is designed. So it gives you immunity. Fourth is it gives you tremendous amount of sensation. That's why each and every part of the body you can sense. And what you can sense touch, you can sense pressure, you can sense vibration, you can sense temperature changes. Everything is a sensation that you can sense all in the form by skin. We are going to see that how it does. And the last is it forms an amorphous mechanical barrier. So this is a barrier which helps you prevent anything from coming inside and any important thing from going outside, as well as it gives you a lot of protection to underlying structures. Otherwise, my bones as well as my muscles, my subcutaneous tissue will all be exposed. So it forms a mechanical barrier. So you can remember all of these functions with this particular simple mnemonic that is called as PRISM. Okay, now let's dig into what exactly the anatomy of skin is all about. Right. So general facts about the skin. This has been asked to you as MCQ based questions. That's why I have put these general facts separately. So what exactly the external covering of the body is called as skin, right? Again, an MCQ, which is the largest organ of the body, it is skin. Now, there is a common mistake that textbooks have. So please note here, many of the textbooks say that 7% of the body weight is formed by skin. But as I've undergone through many textbooks as well as articles, the real answer is 15%. So make sure this is correct. 15% of the body weight is constituted by skin. Now just imagine, every day your skin cells are shedding, right? They are forming, they are shedding, they are forming, they are shedding. 15% of our body weight is just this wrap that we have. Okay, and approximately 100 pounds of skin cells you tend to shed off by the end of your life. So till the end of your life, you're almost shedding off 100 pounds of these skin cells. Just imagine how much skin cells you actually shed and how much weight it carries. Okay, the next thing is this particular skin surface has got a huge surface area. Okay, so we are packed or wrapped all over our body. But if you just take out the skin and stretch it, it has got a massive surface area. This is also a question. How much is the surface area? It is 1.5 to 2 square meters. Okay, and how much is the thickness of the skin? It is about 0.5 to 3 millimeters. So these are the general facts that can be asked to you as MCQ based questions about skin, right? Okay. Now we have learned about whatever things we had to memorize. Let's straight away go on to diagrammatic views and try to think what skin is all about and how it is made up of. Okay, so let's see the layers of the skin. Now, as we have discussed earlier also in the part of epithelium, I already told you there is something called as a surface epithelium, right? Surface epithelium means any epithelium that lines over on the surface of our skin. So the skin also has got something which is above and something what is below. The upper part of the skin is called as an epidermis. Epi means above. In literal terms, epi means above and hypo means below. So epi means above the dermis. Derm means skin itself. That is the Greek word for skin, dermis, right? So epidermis is the outermost layer of the skin. This outermost layer of the skin or the epidermis is constituted by a special type of epithelium. So I already told you what is the epithelium that lines the skin. The skin is lined by stratified squamous epithelium. Now this can be keratinized or it can be non-keratinized. Okay, that depends. But stratified means multiple layers of squamous cells. So multiple layers of squamous cells, that is basically stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, right. Now the lower part below the epidermis is the area what we call as the dermis. The dermis also contains two parts. The upper part of the dermis is called as papillary dermis. I'll tell you why it is called papillary also. It all makes sense. Second is reticular dermis, and I'll tell you why it is reticular also. So the dermis has got upper part as papillary, lower part as reticular dermis. And then comes the area which is present below the dermis is called as hypodermis. Now, what is hypodermis? Hypodermis is also called as subcutaneous tissue. So don't forget, subcutaneous tissue, or if someone says hypodermis, they all mean the same. They're all different terminologies for the same word. Okay, fine. So now you fairly know about what are the layers of the skin. That is the epidermis, the dermis, as well as the hypodermis or subcutaneous tissue. Now I'll just take on each and every layer separately and we'll try to dissect out the answers why these layers have been given to you. Fine. So now let's move on to the first layer, or the epidermis. Now this is the most important and the most asked layer in anatomy when it comes to skin questions. So you need to know this layer very properly. Okay. So how many layers are present in the epidermis also? So I told you above part is the epidermis. Epidermis also is made up of 5 different layers. Okay, so there are 5 layers. If you see from bottom to above, there are 5 layers of kinds of cells which constitute the epidermis. Okay, now what are the cells? I've given it here. There are 5 layers. Okay, so just remember one simple mnemonic. Come, let's get burned. Come, let's get sunburned. Okay, so C, that is corneum. So the uppermost layer is stratum corneum. Okay, always remember, once we are labeling these kind of names of epidermis, the first word always remains to be stratum. Okay, so first word is always stratum in everyone. The second word changes. So the topmost layer is C, okay, for come. So that is corneum. I'll tell you why it is corneum later on. Let's means L, that is lucidum. Get G, that is granulosum. Sun S, that is spinosum. And burned B means basal. Okay, so this is the mnemonic for the layers of epidermis, the 5 layers of epidermis: stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basal. And below that is the dermis that you already know. Now, I already told you in previous chapters that the distinction, or the lowermost end where the epithelium ends, is called as the basement membrane. So you see, this is the basement membrane. So basement membrane is nothing. It is a membrane that separates the lower part and the upper part of an epithelium. That means basically the upper part of the epithelium, the lowermost category of the cells are resting over this membrane called as basement membrane. And below the basement membrane is something that we have already read about, connective tissue. And here we are giving it a name as dermis. So it is all a connective tissue, but we call here the dermis. We got it because that dermis is a form of a skin tissue. That is why we call it the dermis, right? Okay. Now I'm going to show you each and every layer and why they have been given these particular names, right? So let's start about what these layers are made up of individually. Now, before going into these layers, one thing that you need to understand is that I already told you that the epidermis is the upper part and the dermis is the lower part. Now, how is that epidermis and dermis interlocked? You must have seen the previous diagram. You see all of these things, right? These things, these kind of ridges that are coming out. So they're not just plain like one above the other. They are just a lock and key. Now, how do they form the lock and key? There are certain projections which are present in the dermis, which are above like this. And there are certain projections which are on the opposite side from the epidermis. So they basically match each other and they get interlocked. This is the lock and key that happens in skin. So the epidermis, you see these projections that are present. These projections are called as epidermal ridge. Ridge means what? A projection. Okay. Literal meaning for a ridge is something which is bumpy, a projection. So these epidermis have got these projections, which are basically keys. Okay. These are the keys. And they have got these locks below in the dermis, and they are called as dermal papillae. Papillae also has the same thing as a conical projection is called as a papilla. Okay, so the dermis has got papillae, the epidermis has got ridges. When these ridges get interlocked with these dermal papillae, these basically constitute the dermoepidermal junction. So this forms a whole junction after these epidermis ridges gets interlocked with the dermal papillae. So remember that. Okay, so now I've shown you how this dermis and the epidermis gets interlocked with each other. Now I'm going to go into each and every layer of this epidermis, just diagrammatically. Right. Now I've already discussed with you what exactly was the mnemonic, right? Come, let's get sunburned. So the same thing applies here. Okay. I'm going to start from the bottom. Okay, I'll start from the bottom. So you already know that the lowermost layer, sunburned, B means basal. Okay, the lowermost layer of the skin here is called as stratum basal. Okay, this is the lowermost layer. Now forget about these kind of cells. These are specialized cells. I'm going to come later on. But just see these cells. Now, stratum basal is a single layer of cells. That is the first point. This layer contains active and living cells. The cells of the skin are given the name as keratinocytes. Okay, so whatever cell that you are seeing in the skin is named as keratinocyte. Cyte means a cell. Keratin containing cells are called as keratinocytes. Okay, so all of these cells are called as keratinocytes. Now, when we see the basal layer is a single layer, and this layer contains cuboidal to columnar epithelium of single layer cuboidal or single layer columnar epithelium. Now, I already told you how was columnar. They were column-shaped cells with a elongated nuclei at the base. If I talk about cuboidal cells, these are cube-like cells with a round nuclei in the center. Don't confuse. Okay, so these are the lowermost layers, and this is the active layer. Why? Because this is the stem cell layer. Whenever skin is getting shed off, these cells are dying. Then again, new cells are coming out. Then again, they are shedding off. This cycle of skin shedding is approximately every time, everywhere, right? Just if I tell you, just go and wash your hands, you're almost shedding out 500 to 600 skin cells just like that, just by rubbing your hands. So who is making these cells? It is this layer, the stratum basal. That is why, because it is germinating new cells and it is a stem cell layer, this is also called as stratum germinativum, because it is germinating or cultivating new cells which are shed off again and again. Okay, so what you need to know, it is a single layer of cuboidal or columnar epithelium, and this particular layer is the layer which germinates new cells which basically have to travel from base to above. This is how the cell has to travel. If a cell is dead from above, it has to travel from below, go into the second layer, that is spinosome, go into granulosome, go into lucidum, right? This is called as an epithelial turnover. That means if a cell is dying, the lowermost cell is coming up just like this, and it is going and establishing itself here. That's called as an epithelial turnover, correct? So now after basal, you already know basal is producing cells which are active. They are living cells. These cells are keratinocytes. Whenever there is a need, the cell will go up through this and it will go and become the topmost layer. Now let's come to the second layer here. This is called as stratum spinosum. Okay. Now why it has been given the name spinosum? There is a reason behind that. You see these cells being joined together with each other, right? They look like spines, right? And what is this connection between cells called as? This connection between cells is called as desmosome. Okay, desmosome. Now desmosome is nothing. It is a connector between two keratinocytes. So these are also keratinocytes, right? These keratinocytes are linked together by these specialized proteins, and they are called as desmosomes. Now that is the reason, because this seems to be spiny, and that's why it is given spinosome. We also give it a name as prickle cell layer. So if you see, this looks like a prickly layer. When you see it under the microscope, they will form like prickles. That's why it's called as a prickly layer. Okay, fine. Now we move on to the next layer here. Now you see this layer, this is called as stratum granulosum. Now, why do you call it granulosum? That is another point. Granule means these are keratinocytes which contain certain amount of granules, correct? And what are these granules called as? These granules are keratin forming granules. So I already told you. Now see, this particular cell and this particular cell is different. That means once the cell is going from base to above, two things are happening to it. One, it is gaining keratin inside it. And second, once it's gaining keratin, it is becoming dead. That is why the topmost layer of the skin is dead. Okay, so once this cell is active and it is living below, it is not having keratin. Don't forget, keratin is not present in spinosum and in our stratum basal. Once this cell goes up through spinosum into granulosa layer, in stratum granulosum, you get keratinized. The first keratin appears inside the cell in granulosum, And why is that granulosome? Why? Because it contains granules, and these granules are basically given the name as keratohyaline granules. So keratohyaline means they secrete a filament that is keratin, and they cause aggregation of keratin. Now you understand. Now, once keratin is something which is hard. Now, something inside the cell, if it starts depositing so hard, what will happen? The cell will lose its vitality. That means now the cell will not have any space for the nucleus, any space for other organelles. It will just have keratin inside. So why is that happening? Because the cells have to go above and protect us, protect our deeper layers. So now once the keratin is there inside the cells, it will lose its vitality. Now comes again a question. In stratum lucidum, are the cells living or dead? They are dead. They are dead because now the keratin is already present inside the cells, right? And by the time they reach the stratum corneum, they are laden with keratin, and that forms our corneal layer. And we call these cells as corneocytes. As simple as that. Now you understand how a cell is going from below to above and actually presenting itself here. Correct? So this particular pathway of a cell from below to above is called as epithelial turnover time. And the regular time for an epithelial turnover, that is a question for you, is around 56 days. Now, how is this 56 days? That is also important. A cell from the basal layer takes 14 days to reach the uppermost layer. This is a question. Second question is, how much time does the cell stay here? It is around 14 days more. It stays here and matures, and it takes 28 days more after that for the regular shedding process. So that is why on an average, the epithelial turnover time is around 56 to 58 days. That you should remember. Okay, right. Now, next question, another question is that I'll just summarize this. Spinosome and basal have living cells. Granulosome is the area where they get keratinized. They start getting keratinized. So in granulosa layer, they are not dead till now. The process of dying has started. Once the keratin is full within the cells, they go to the lucidum, they are dead. They lose their organelles, they lose their nucleus, and on the corneum, they are absolutely dead. Okay, so the topmost two layers are dead. They're not made of living tissue. Okay, always remember that. Right? So now we have seen what exactly all these things are and what exactly these layers are. Always remember that mnemonic, that simple mnemonic that I told you, and why is that happening. Right? Fine. So now you see the real picture. Now you will understand the whole meaning of it. This is an histological slide of actually what looks like under the microscope. Now you see the lowermost layer. This is cuboidal to columnar epithelium. This is our stratum basal, right? Above that, you have these layers of polygonal cells which are attached to each other by desmosomes, and you call it the spinosome or the prickle layer, right? And finally, above that is a part where you get lucidum, granulosome. And in that granulosome, you have these granules. So you can see dot, 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 dot appearance. This is the granulosa layer. This is the layer where they get keratinized. Above that, in some areas, we have lucidum. So that's why it's not labeled here. Now, the question is, where do you have stratum lucidum? Stratum lucidum is an extra layer. Just remember like that. Okay. Now, lucidum will be required in order to form an extra layer in all those areas of the body which require the maximum thickness. Now, which is the maximum thickness areas? Palms and soles. So lucidum is present majorly in palms and soles. That is also another question. Where is lucidum present? So it is present over our palms. It is present over our soles. Why? Because it gives an extra thickness to the epidermis. And finally, once the cells are dead, they form these kind of flattened kind of cells. These are called as corneocytes. And finally, this is the stratum corneum. Okay. So this is how the whole picture of an epidermis looks like. Now you see these kind of ridges that the epidermis has made. These ridges are called as epidermal ridges. The dermis has got these interlocking digitations, which are given the name as dermal papillae, which are conical. Correct? So now you understood about what exactly the cells or how exactly the epidermis is made up of. Right. Now we move on to some cells of the epidermis. Now, half of the cells, you must have seen that there are some cells in between here and here, and why these cells have been given and what exactly is the role of these cells. Okay, so this is also very, very important. So what are the cells of epidermis? So I already told you the topmost cells that are just shed off, they are dead. They are called as corneocytes. We don't need to know much about them because they don't have any organelle or a nucleus. They are just keratinized cells which are just present on top. That's why it's called as corneocytes. The skin cells which are present, which have a nucleus, they are normally called as keratinocytes. Okay, this is an important. So this is keratinocytes. Now you see some specialized cells that are there inside in your skin. Okay, and they are very, very important for you. First type of cell that you see here, this is called as Langerhans cell. Now, all of these have complex names, but actually the function is very, very easy. Okay. Now, see this Langerhans. Langerhans cells have got these kind of projections. Now, what exactly do you mean by Langerhans cells? In the last lecture, we told you about a cell in the connective tissue that is called as macrophage. What does a macrophage do? A macrophage is a cell which engulfs or eats pathogens. Now, if that macrophage goes inside a tissue like skin, we call it Langerhans cells. So tissue-dependent macrophages are also called as, you'll be given 4 options. The answer is Langerhans cells. Okay, these are also found in lymph nodes. But always remember that tissue-dependent, wherever this macrophage is going to be the same. That macrophage, if it is inside the blood, we call it a monocyte. If it goes inside the tissue, we call it a specialized type of macrophage. So once it goes into the skin, we start calling it Langerhans cells. And if you see, it has got these kind of dendrite-like projections. Why it is that? Because it is going to trap these organisms through these dendrites and eat it up. And once it's going to engulf it, it is going to generate an immune response inside. That is why Langerhans cells have got immunity-related importance in our skin. So who's protecting us? Langerhans cells is protecting us when it comes to pathogens. Okay, right. Now we come to another important cells that is called as melanocytes. Melanocytes are melanin producing cells. What is melanin? Skin pigment. You know there is a pigment that is present in our skin that is called as melanin. And who secretes that melanin? Cells that secrete is melanocyte. Cyte means a cell. So melanocyte. And then there is something that is important for our very important sensations. And I'm going to tell you. So there are certain cells inside our epidermis which are important for our touch perception. And we call them Merkel cells. Now, this will come later on. Don't worry about it. I'm going to really tell you each and everything about how sensations are produced. Okay. So these are the important cells. Just know about the names. And then we are going to see how they actually work. Okay, fine. Now you must have seen a cream ad everywhere. Get brighter in 14 days. Does it actually make sense? Okay, because this is something that people are actually ordering everywhere online, and you have got these posters that a person who has a dark complexion will turn into a white complexion in just 14 days by applying a cream. But unfortunately, it's not true. Okay, and I'm going to tell you why. So I spoke to you about melanin. Okay, so always remember there is something called as a melanocyte. That melanocyte is producing a pigment called melanin. The more the melanin, the more darker the complexion is. The lesser the melanin, the lesser darker or the fairer the complexion is. So if you see the Europeans or the Americans, they have got a very fair complexion because of the low count of melanin. But if you see the Asians, right, or if you see the Africans, they have got a darker complexion. Why? Because the melanin count is high. Now, just not giving you a skin pigment, melanin has got a very important role. What is that role? Melanin absorbs ultraviolet radiation. So suppose if I'm having a dark complexion that has been gifted to me by nature, okay, what does that mean? It means my skin has a larger amount of melanin inside because melanocytes are producing that melanin. Now remember this thing. If a person is having a darker complexion, that doesn't mean he has more melanocytes. Melanocytes are going to be the same number in every individual. It is just the activity by which they produce melanin is going to be different. So I am having, suppose, 10 melanocytes. My partner has 10 melanocytes. We both have different complexions. Why? Because of the fact my melanocytes are working a little more and his might be a little less. Okay? So remember this thing. Now, the more the melanin, I told you, the more darker the skin is. Now, melanin absorbs ultraviolet radiation. Okay. So that means a person who's having a dark complexion is having more absorption of ultraviolet light, and this is protecting the underlying structures. And the person who is having a very fair skin, he has less melanin, so he won't be able to protect himself by ultraviolet radiation that much as a person who's having a dark complexion. That is why skin cancers are more prevalent in Europeans as well as Americans. Why? Because they are fairer. They have a fair skin. Now you understand why that epidemiology they say everywhere. Fair skin people have skin cancers more. That you don't need to memorize that. There's a logic behind it. Because of the fact they have less melanin count. Less melanin means less absorption of ultraviolet light. Less absorption of ultraviolet light means more predisposition of ultraviolet light to hit into deeper structures and cause cancerous growths. Got the idea? They cause more DNA damage. Okay, so remember this thing: the darker the complexion, the more the melanin, the lesser or the fairer the complexion, the lesser the melanin. Okay, fine. Now I told you about this particular cell. Okay, and this particular cell is present where? It is present at the basal layer. Okay, you can see at the basal and the spinosal layer, this cell is present here, and this is called as a melanocyte. Now, this melanocyte approximately is of the same number in every individual. The activity of the melanocytes depends skin pigmentation. This melanocyte contains very important organelles to store melanin. And this melanin is stored inside these organelles called as melanosomes. Okay, melanosomes. These are the organelles which store. Just like you have in your cell lysosomes. Okay, lysosomes do what? They just engulf and throw it out. Similarly, a specialized type of lysosome is called as melanosome. Now, what happens? Okay, now I'll tell you a very interesting concept. Have you ever thought that suppose I am a fair person, okay, or let's say I want to go beach bathing and I am a very fair person. When I go to a beach, I get tanned. What does that tanning mean? Okay, why do I get tanned? Have you ever thought about it? Or let's say this particular individual or this particular lady goes to a beach and she gets tanned. That means now she's very fair skinned, but she has now a darker patch here, a darker patch here. Why did that happen? And after some days, the tan washes away. How did that happen? This is the concept behind melanosomes and melanocytes. What exactly it does? Now see this. This particular is suppose the melanocyte that is present in the basal layer. I told you that it is a specialized cell and it contains melanosomes. So you can see there are many melanosomes. Now, this melanocyte has got these projections, right? These projections are basically like pseudopodia. You understand pseudopodia means they are going everywhere. They are pseudopodial growths. Now, this pseudopodia, you can see they are to every keratinocyte above. See, they have these attachments to all keratinocytes above. Now, what happens? The same lady goes for sunbathing. She's fair and she has less melanin because she is fair. Now what happens? This layer, it is living. Okay. So if that lady sits in the sunlight, she already has less melanin. Ultraviolet light is going to come side because melanin is not stopping it because she has less melanin. She is fair. And straight away going to go to the lower layer and it will destroy the nucleus. It will destroy the DNA and this lady will predispose to a cancer. But that doesn't happen. Why? Because once she goes into the sun, these melanocytes get activated. And once they get activated, they start releasing these melanosomes through these pseudopodia or through these projections into the keratinocytes which are present above. This process is called as docking. Just as a boat docks itself next to the shore, they also dock their melanin into these keratinocytes. And now this keratinocyte will be full of melanin. See, all these keratinocytes have these melanin now. So now what will happen? Once this particular sun will come now, the melanin will trap all the ultraviolet light. And because of the excessive transient or temporary pigmentation, because the melanocytes have constantly sent off melanin to many areas, the areas where melanin is high, they will become dark or they will become pigmented. That is called as tan. Now you understand how tanning occurs. It is just a transient way or a physiological way in which you are saving yourself so that your ultraviolet radiation does not get to the lower structures and damage your DNA. Right? Now you understand? So this is how you tend to know things and you fit it into scenarios, because otherwise skin becomes very difficult to understand. Right? Now we move on to the next layer, what is called as the dermal layer. Now I already told you, we have discussed about what is there inside this layer. We have discussed about the 5 layers of the epidermis with the mnemonic, the specialized cells that are present in the epidermis, and we have understood about each and everything. Now we'll go on to the dermis. Now I already told you Dermis, we have already known that this is a type of connective tissue, nothing else. Connective tissue means connecting two important structures above and below. That is basically a connective tissue. Now, if you remember the last class, connective tissue has got three important elements. And I told you what? That time, Ryan had discussed that there are certain things called as fibers, there are certain cells, and there are certain ground substance that form the connective tissue. There are three things. Remember that bucket of water with things inside? The same way, dermis is also a connective tissue. Okay? Now, this dermis is divided into an upper part that is called as a papillary dermis and the lower part which is called as a reticular dermis. Why this is called as papillary dermis? I already told you, they have got these dermal papillae or projections which interlock in these digits or ridges of epidermis. That's why it's called as papillary dermis. And lower than that is the reticular dermis. What is reticular? Reticular means a network or a meshwork. So this forms a meshwork or a reticular or a network formed of many, many things. They are formed of cells, they are formed of blood vessels, they are formed of various kinds of fibers. Okay, they are formed of various kinds of ground substance. So this all connects and creates the reticular dermis. And you already know that below the reticular dermis, there is something called as hypodermis, also called as a subcutaneous tissue, right? Okay. Now we move on to why do I blush? The same thing, right? Suppose a person who likes someone, suddenly that person comes inside the class and you start seeing that person and you turn red here, right? You start blushing. Why is that blushing happening? Now, if you see this particular structure of the dermis, I already told you, this particular dermis contains blood vessels. And these blood vessels, you can see they are carrying something which is red, that is oxygen, that is oxyhemoglobin, oxygen containing hemoglobin. And then after that, there's deoxygenated blood, which is going through the veins. Okay, this is why they form certain loops in the dermis, and these are called as capillary loops. They are very high in the dermis. That is why, suppose if you see someone, you get excited. And once you get excited, what happens? Suddenly, your blood vessels start dilating. And once your blood vessels start dilating, suddenly you will feel a blush or your pink flush over here, and everywhere. Okay, so that is why, because of vasodilation. You understood? Now, suppose at the same time, you are very warm, okay, and suddenly somebody throws you inside a good cold, okay, in very cold atmosphere. And what will happen? Suddenly, what will happen? Your skin won't be able to take that cold. And these vessels will constrict. Why? Because if the vessels are dilated, they will lose a lot of heat. If you're thrown inside on the cold, your vessels will constrict. That is called as vasoconstriction. And once they will constrict, what will happen? They will not let the heat go out. That is why when you go in cold, you become pale and white because of that reason. Okay, so now you understand why you become pale and white. You are nervous. Suppose you're sitting in an exam. What will happen? Your toes, everything turns very cold, right? Why? Because of vasoconstriction. Once you get blushed, it is about vasodilation. Now you understood why does that dermal circulation play a role? Okay, now suppose a surgeon gives a cut over on a skin. If suppose the skin bleeds, what thing you can think of? That you are in the dermis. Why? Because the blood vessels are there in the dermis. If it does not bleed, that means you are in the epidermis. Epidermis is not having any vessels, they only have cells. Now you understand? So as soon as suppose you get a cut, and if you see blood, that means you have crossed the epidermis and now you are in the dermis. If you don't see it, that means you're still in the epidermis. Got the idea? So this is how you can correlate about the importance of these layers, right? Now we have seen what is the papillary dermis got to do. It is nothing but a loose areolar tissue which is present there and it contains certain capillary loops. Okay, this is the main importance of papillary dermis. Once it comes to the reticular dermis, I told you reticular means a lot of things inside, a lot of meshwork. Now, how is this meshwork formed? By fibers, by cells, by ground substance. Everything together is called as a connective tissue that is forming the reticular dermis. Now, the highest amount of thing that is found in the reticular dermis is these pink colored fibers, which are nothing, but they are bundles of fibers with stain pink with eosin. And we discussed last time. What are these bundles of fibers? They are called as collagen. Okay, so this is the highest constituent inside a skin. Now, why is that collagen important? Collagen is important. Why? Because it has to give you a stretch. It has to give you a bend. Otherwise, my hand won't bend like this, right? So the bend, the stretch, the deformation, everything is being given by this collagen fibers. They are abundant and they are parallel to each other. See, there are many more, and they are all parallel to each other. Okay, that is what is giving them flexibility. Together with this collagen fibers, you have got many cells inside them, which are nothing but, as we have already discussed, there are certain things which are already present here, and there are certain cells which come from somewhere else. So there are certain cells which are resident, and there are certain cells like fibroblasts, or there are certain cells which are coming from somewhere foreign. They are NRI cells, like immune cells, whenever there is a chance for immunity. Okay, so these are the cells which are interspersed in this reticular dermis. And the third thing is binding all of these cells as well as these fibers is something called as a ground substance. That is also present inside this. Right? So this is what the reticular dermis contains. Okay, it also contains hair that we'll deal separately, so don't worry about that. This is the major constituent of dermis. Right. Now, why this dermis is important? Again, your concept should go why you have been given this dermis. Okay, so reticular dermis, I already told you, has a lot of these kind of fibers. And if you see these fibers are like bundles, and they are basically parallel to each other, or they are longitudinally oriented. You see all these fibers? These fibers are called as collagen fibers. They are arranged in various bundles, right? Now, similarly, these collagen fibers have got different orientations in different parts of our body. These collagen fibers are like this here, like this here. Every part of our body is made up of collagen fibers. And all of this skin, whatever it is, it has got these kind of collagen fiber orientations. See this? Now, this orientation of these collagen fibers in front and behind gives a certain line. Okay, and this line is nothing, it is called as a Langer. You must have seen over on your face, there might be many tiny lines. Okay, these are why these lines came. These lines have come because the collagen beneath that particular area is oriented in this fashion. And that is why it is giving a reflection over on the surface. And this is given the name as Langer line. Now, why it is called as Langer line? Because Langer was an Austrian anatomist, and he was the one who found this. Okay, so that is why they started calling them Langer lines. Okay, now, what is the importance of these lines? Suppose if you have this particular ulcer over on the forehead, let's say here. Now, if suppose I'm a surgeon, and if I cut this ulcer perpendicular to it, let's say like this, if I cut it out, what will happen? I am against the collagen fibers. That means my collagen is like this. I'm giving a cut like this. What will happen? There will be tremendous amount of scarring. It will lead a very bad scar there. But suppose I cut it along the line of Langer, what will happen? They both will join together very smoothly, and the scarring will be very less. This is why in cosmetic surgery especially, we use these Langer lines for incisions. If you use these Langer lines, the scarring is very less, and it doesn't give you a very bad kind of a scab over in areas which are seen mostly and are presentable. Okay, otherwise there will be a very bad scar. Okay, so always remember the utilization of these Langer lines. They are the orientations of collagen fibers, and they are used for making incisions. Okay, as a surgeon. Right. Now you know that the main part. So we have seen how thermoregulation is happening. We have seen how protection is happening, and we have seen how the skin is forming that mechanical barrier and how many cells are there. Still, one thing we have not understood, that is how the skin is sensing. Okay, so when we call about sensation, you remember the senses: touch, pressure, vibration, temperature. What do you mean by that? If I just gently put my finger over another thing, this is called as a touch. If I lot of touch, that means I increase my touch, it is called as pressure. Okay, that means a coarse touch is called as pressure. And then if I move this pressure again to and fro, this is called as vibration. That means the deep pressure to and fro is given the name as vibration. And temperature, you all know, it is hot and cold. So these are the four important sensations that a skin can sense. Okay, now comes very important MCQ. What exactly senses what? Okay, this has been multiple times asked in your exams. Okay, so there are certain things called as corpuscles. Now, what do you mean literally by a corpuscle? Corpuscle literally means a small body. So suppose if I call red blood corpuscle, that is nothing, a small body of red cell, a small body of white cell. That is why they have been named as corpuscles. That literally means in Greek, red, a round body, small body. Now, these corpuscles have been distributed in underneath your skin, that means underneath the dermis, And they have been divided into 5 major categories. The first category is called as a Merkel disc. Second is called as a Meissner corpuscle. Third is called as a Pacinian corpuscle. Fourth is a Ruffini nerve ending. And fifth is called as cross corpuscle. Now, this terminologies are difficult. It's very easy to understand. Okay. Now, simple. Let's say you are playing a keyboard. Right? So you are typing on your laptop. Why do you feel the touch here? How does your brain know that touch is there? So that means there have to be some amount of receptors that are present over here. These receptors are what? These receptors are called as Merkel disc. Now you see this Merkel disc? This Merkel disc is a receptor which is present just underneath your dermis. See like this, right? It is not having any capsule. Because it is not having any capsule and it is just present underneath your dermal layer, what will happen? It will catch any kind of sensation from above, and this sensory nerve will go and transmit all that thing that you have felt to the central nervous system. And you will understand, oh, yes, I'm feeling a light touch. That is why Merkel disc is for light touch. Where have you been given this? Over on your fingertips, over on your ears. Just see the tips of everything. These are all areas for light touch. Right? So they are rich in these Merkel cells. Okay, so they do not have a capsule, right? And they are present just below this dermal papilla. Right? And they are for light touch sensation. That is the first thing. Now comes two important things: Meissner's and Pacinian. Okay, Meissner's is for touch, but little harder touch, which has a low vibration. Okay, so just remember that Meissner's is a little above Merkel. So two M's are there. Both M's, Merkel and Meissner's, are for touch. Merkel is for light touch. Meissner is for deeper touch. So Meissner's you see here, both are at the same level. See, why? Because the touch has to be from above. Correct? You can perceive touch only when this goes above. So that's why both the M's are touching over on the epidermis. But Meissner's has got a little higher touch sensation than the Merkel, okay? And it also responds to low vibration. Now comes the third category, Pacinian. Pacinian means what? This particular corpuscle has a tendency for higher vibration. That means you vibrate and you vibrate a lot. That means it need not touch the epidermis because the vibration will come below, right? So that is why Pacinian corpuscles are deep, because the vibration will anyways come. It need not be on top and present here, right? So this is present deep. This is for high frequency vibration, right? Then you have something called as a Ruffini ending. What is for Ruffini? Ruffini nerve endings are nothing. These are stretch receptors. It means anything that is stretching. Most stretch is seen over on tendons, over on joints, right? So Ruffini nerve endings are highest in what? They are highest in joints. Okay, and the last is cross. K for cross, C for cold. So you say the K, right? And C for cold. Cross usually takes up the cold sensations. Okay, so remember two M's, they are both over on the surface. They both are for touch, but Merkel is for light touch. Meissner's is for deeper touch. Pacinian is deep. It is not over on the surface for high frequency vibration. Ruffini for stretch, wherever tendons and stretching is there. And cross, the K and cold. Okay, remember like this. So this is a very important and high yielding MCQ. It comes in your exams and again it's asked. Okay, so don't confuse. Right. Now, once we have finished off the dermis, okay, we move on to the hypodermis. Hypodermis is nothing. It is easy. I told you this hypodermis is nothing but the subcutaneous tissue. Below the level of the dermis, there is hypodermis. And this is nothing that it contains only fat cells. You see this fat cell, we already mentioned about it. This is called as an adipocyte. And it has got a lipid droplet or a fat reservoir. And it has got a flattened nucleus, which is present at the periphery. This is a classical adipocyte. Whenever you see this is again the subcutaneous tissue. Whenever I cut the skin and start seeing the fat, the moment I see the fat, I will know that I'm in the hypodermis or in the subcutaneous layer. Okay, below the subcutaneous layer will be my fascia and muscles. So that is why the fascia and muscles are below. This is my last layer where my dermis is going to end. Okay, fine. Now, what does that subcutaneous fat teach you? Or how will that subcutaneous fat come to you, in your everyday life? Why is that fat given to you? Now my question first comes here. Okay, that fat has been given to you to insulate you so that you don't feel very cold. Okay. Second, that fat has been given to you to protect you. that if you have any kind of an injury, it doesn't go through and through into your muscle and bones. And the third, this fat releases a very important hormone that is called as leptin. What is leptin? Leptin is a hormone which decreases your appetite. Suppose if a person is very, very thin, his fat will release more of leptin so that he eats more. But if a person is very obese, that person will release leptin more so that he eats less. You're understanding? So leptin basically makes you eat less. The moral of the story is like that. If leptin is more, you will eat less. You will feel less hungry. Okay. So what do we call this hypodermis when it increases? So you must have seen that this is particularly a very chiseled body. The person has got abs. Now, why is that abs coming? Because this person's hypodermis is very, very thin or hardly there, and his muscle layer is out, right? So that is why you can get these kind of abs, right? Or you can have these muscles because hardly the hypodermis is there. But you see another of this man, the hypodermis has gone very, very thick, right? Just see like this. You've got a very thick hypodermis. And that is why the storage of the fat is very much inside this layer. And that is why he has got this kind of an obesity in the center. Now comes this thing. You must have seen that suddenly when you tend to lose weight, you get these kind of dimples, right? When you're very fat and you lose weight, you must have seen these kind of dimpling coming. What is this called as? This is called as a cellulite. What do you mean by cellulite? That means if you have this kind of a fat, this fat will organize itself into multiple bundles. And that is why it gives an orange peel appearance. So if you see this gives like an orange peel appearance, right? This is usually seen in cases of females. So females usually after the time when they have given birth, right? So you see that the stomach, they will have multiple of these kind of dimples, right? So this is called as a cellulite. So these are the three morphological forms in which that subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis has. And then you can come to know in your real life what exactly is going wrong, where exactly that fat is getting stored, where exactly this is happening, why that dimple is come, why that chiseled body is there, and what happened when he went to the gym. This all makes sense now, right? Okay. Now I would deal very fast. This is what we have done is the part of the skin through and through. So you've already understood what the skin is like. Okay, the integument is over. Now the side appendage, I told you that something connected to a very important thing is called as an appendage. So the skin has three appendages. One is hair, second is glands, third is nails. So I'm not going to describe nail here. Nail is a separate chapter for you, but I'm going to just briefly talk about hair and glands because that also you need to know. Okay, how does your hair work? Why do you get goosebumps? How does your hair protect you? All of these things make sense. Okay, right. So first thing, let's move to the hair. Now, as you can see in there, that where exactly is the hair? The hair is present inside the dermis, and a part of the hair is projecting out of the dermis and out of the epidermis outside. So the visible portion of the hair is called as the hair shaft, and the buried part of the hair is called as the hair root. Remember that. So this is what you see. This is called as hair shaft. This is called as buried. So this is hair root. Okay, remember this. These two terminologies. Now hair is difficult. Okay, but what I've tried to do is make it very, very simple for you just by one diagram. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out and I'm going to show it to you in this very, very simple diagram that I have drawn. Okay, so what exactly this diagram means. Now, suppose I've drawn this. So this is the epidermis. This is the part of the hair that is projecting out. And this is the part of the hair that is inside. So you know the projection outside is called as a shaft. Inside, this is called as a root of the hair. Okay. Now, this particular hair contains a very important muscle that is attached to it. Okay. This muscle is erector pili muscle. Erector means it erects it, and pilus means hair. Okay. So if you see this diagram, you can see this particular hair having this muscle like this, right? This muscle is called as erector pili muscle. It is on one end joining to the hair, on the other side joining to the epidermis. Okay, so this is the erector pilus muscle. The erector pili muscle divides the hair into two parts. One is above the erector pilus, that is upper segment. One is below the erector pilus, that is lower segment. Okay, fine. This hair also has an opening of an important gland. This gland is called as sebaceous gland. Now, I'm going to tell you when I tell you about how do you get dandruff. This is called as sebaceous gland. Okay, you see here this particular gland opening. This is called as sebaceous gland. Right? This sebaceous gland again divides the upper segment into a part above that is called as infundibulum and a part below that is called as isthmus. The idea? So erector pili muscle is dividing the hair into two, upper segment and lower segment. Sebaceous glands further divide into the upper segment into an upper part called as the infundibulum and the lower part called as the isthmus. This is the story up till the level of the insertion of erector pili muscle. Now comes the lower segment. The lower segment is further classified into two categories by something called as an Adamson's fringe. This is a question for you. What is Adamson's fringe? Adamson's fringe is nothing. It is a network of cells which divides the lower segment of the hair into a called the stem and a lower part called as the bulb. Right? Now you understood the two segments. Okay. Now the bulb of the hair contains the center part where it contains all these nerve endings, all these blood vessels. That is why when you pluck your hair, you must have seen something white at that end. What is that white? That is the hair bulb. And that is why it creates some kind of bleeding. Why? Because this has something called as a blood vessel entering inside it. And it pains because it has got a nerve ending also. This is called as the dermal papilla, the portion of the bulb which contains all of this. And then outside of this papilla are layers of cells which are keratinocytes. Here also you will have keratinocytes. This is called as hair matrix. Okay. So remember these parts of the hair. Okay. Right. Now, the portion where this hair attaches or where this erector pilus muscle attaches to the hair, this portion produces a bulge. This is called as a hair bulge area. Now, why is that hair bulge area important? The area contains stem cells. So suppose if there is damage to this particular area, stem cells will be lost. If you lose stem cells, what will happen? The person will have permanent hearing, permanent hair loss. That means that he won't have hair. It's called as alopecia. So you must have seen some people lose their hair and they are absolutely bald. Right? What has happened? The stem cell is not regenerating cells anymore. That's why the cell, that's why the hair is losing again and again. So permanent hair loss, what we call it cicatricial hair loss, to be very specific. That is because the hair bulge area damages and the hair cannot come back. Okay, so now you understood what are the parts of the hair and how exactly it is, right? Now, similarly, this part of the hair is also divided from inside outward. So this is something called as a vertical section. Then if you take a section of the hair that is transverse, it is divided into multiple layers. Now, how do you deal with this? And this is also, again, a very important question for you because they have gone into this depth. That is why I've covered this. So the innermost layer of the hair is called as medulla. Medulla is present in thick hair. It is absent in thin hair. Remember that. Okay. So innermost is medulla. Outer to the medulla, there is something called as cortex. Cortex is the one which contains melanin and it is the one which contains all your keratin. So the lush of our hair, the color of our hair, everything is being given by the cortex. Remember that. The layer of the cell, the layer of the hair, which contains pigment, which contains keratin is cortex. Okay. So innermost is medulla, which is seen in thick hair, not seen in thin hair. Outer is cortex. After that, there is another layer that is called as the cuticle of the hair. Okay. These three, cuticle, from innermost, medulla, cortex and cuticle together constitute the hair shaft. This is a question, which constitute the hair shaft. So medulla, cortex and cuticle together are given the name as hair shaft, which is the visible portion of the hair. Right. Now outside this particular hair shaft is something called as an inner root sheath. Outer to that is an outer root sheath. Outer to that is a glassy membrane. And outer to that, there is a connective sheath. So these are the 5 layers. Okay, I'll repeat again. First is a hair shaft, which is formed from medulla, cortex, and cuticle. Then after that, there is inner root sheath. That means around the root, there is inner root sheath. Outer to that, there is outer root sheath. Outer to that, there is something like a glass or a glassy membrane. And outer to that, there is a last layer that is a connective sheath or connective root sheath, or we can also call it a dermal sheath. These are the layers from inside to out of a particular hair section. But the most important layer being here is the cortex. Cortex provides pigment as well as it provides protection because it contains keratin, right? So now you understood these are the different layers of the cell. We see it over on a transverse section. Now, They've also gone into asking, what is the inner root sheath made up of? The inner root sheath, if you see here, contains another 3 layers. And these are called as outer cuticle, Huxley, and Henle layer. So there are 2 H here, Huxley layer, Henle layer, and cuticle. They all are together called as inner root sheath. So from outside to inside, you should know all of these layers and what exactly they form. Right. So this is the difficult part of learning the hair. But now you see the easy part. If Ronald Weasley has got red hair, why did that red hair come? Because of the content of melanin, right? So melanin, if it is producing a red or a yellow color, it is called as pheomelanin. But at the same time, Shah Rukh Khan has got black hair. So black hair is basically called as eumelanin. So any person who has got a darker part, complexion or a darker kind of hair, they are basically constituted by eumelanin. And on the other side, when you have got yellow or orange or red, that is basically pheomelanin. That is another question asked to you. That pheomelanin forms which color? So it is red and yellow. Okay. So now you remember how cortex is going to have these different colors, and you already know how these melanocytes are and how the melanosomes are. So the same logic applies here, how they provide these color into these hair. Okay. Now, why do I get goosebumps? Okay. That is my another thing, that whenever you see something, all my hair stand up. Why? Because of the fact that if you see here, you have got this important muscle that I told you, erector pili muscle. As soon as you fear something, or you have a fright, or if you have something like cold, suddenly your erector pili will contract and your hair will stand up. That's why we call it, in general language, goosebumps. Got the idea? Simple. So now you understand why these things are happening. Okay, right. Now, why do my hair fall? That is another question. If I do everyday hair combing, my hair fall off. Is it natural? Is it more? This particularly thing depends upon something called as a hair cycle. Okay, so your hair are constantly in a cycle where they are getting formed, they are getting dropped out. This is a constant thing that is going on in everyone. Okay, so the whole hair cycle is divided into 3 phases: anagen phase, catagen phase, and telogen phase. Now, what do you mean by that? That means this is the phase where hair grows. That means the hair is becoming a hair in this anagen phase. 85% of our hair over the body are in anagen phase always. 85%. This is also a question that has been asked. How many percentage of the hair are in anagen? It is 85% of the cells that are there in anagen phase. Now remember the rule of 3. Anagen continues for 3 years. That means for 3 years, you will have anagen phase. Okay. Now comes the second phase. This is called as catagen phase. Now that means that now my follicle has fully grown, my hair has fully grown, and now it will stop growing, and finally it will drop off the follicle. This is called as catagen. Okay, because it is detaching from the follicle. Okay. Now again, I told you, this is again a rule of 3. This stays for 3 weeks. Okay, so this was 3 years. Catagen is for 3 weeks. Telogen means that now finally my hair cell is dead and my hair is finally extruding out and it falls off. That is called as telogen phase. And this is the one which basically lasts for another 3 months. So don't forget, 3 years anagen, 3 weeks is catagen. Finally, the hair falls off by telogen phase that lasts for 3 months. Okay, and then the hair appears for the next cycle. So always remember, your hair cycle is continuing in different parts of the body in different ways. It's not like all my hair will fall off at once. That is why on my brush, I see some hair coming out, right? It might be because my falling stage is there and they will fall off. Correct. Unless and until there is some kind of a pathology to it. Right. Now I come to the last part of the hair, that is the glands. So this is also, I told you, as an appendage. So the hair is also containing some amount of glands to it, right? And these glands are basically called as sweat glands as well as sebaceous glands, right? So you've got 2 categories of glands when it comes to hair. Now, always remember, glandular anatomy we'll read separately, but I'm just going to give you an overview. Glands are 2 types when it comes to skin: sebaceous, sweat. Sweat are again of 2 types: apocrine, merocrine. Okay, now what do you mean by that? Now see this particular sweat gland here. This is a simple coiled tubular structure which contains a duct, and this duct goes and opens by something called as a sweat pore. Now this is a sweat gland. That means it creates sweat and it pours it out. Correct? This type of a sweat gland is called as merocrine gland. What do you mean by merocrine? Merocrine means that the cell creates sweat and that sweat goes through the duct and it comes out. The cell does not detach or cell does not undergo anything. Only the part of the cell what it is making, that means the sweat, that is the only thing that comes out. Right? That is what creates sweat. Now, what is sweat? Sweat is nothing but water, 99% with 1% of salts. That is what sweat is. Right? Okay. Now, the second part, so you see, this is merocrine. That means all the sweat is secreted here. Second kind of a sweat gland is called as apocrine gland. Now, what do you mean by apocrine gland? Apocrine gland means that this is a similar kind of a sweat gland. But instead of opening through the skin surface, this kind of apocrine gland opens into the hair shaft itself. Now, you understood? So, merocrine variety of sweat glands open on the skin surface. Apocrine variety of sweat glands open in the hair follicle itself. Okay, so they will release these kinds of viscous secretions of sweat directly into the hair follicle, and this particular thing will come out through the hair. Are you understanding? So all the oily secretions that come out from the sweat glands are through apocrine variety. Now, what is apocrine? Apocrine means the cell will also lose a part of itself once it's extruding out the substance. In merocrine, it's only the substance that is released. If a particular apocrine sweat gland is there, it will also lose a part of the cell also, once it's losing its constituent, right? So these are called as apocrine variety of sweat cells. And now comes the third variety that is called as sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are nothing, but they contain sebum. Sebum is nothing, but it is something which is very sticky, right? That is what sebaceous glands are made up of. So now if you see, sebaceous glands don't have a duct. They don't have a duct like this sweat gland. What exactly makes them? These are falling into holocrine variety. What does holocrine mean? That is why they don't have a duct. That means once they create sebum, the whole cell will go inside and disintegrate. That's why, because they don't have a duct. The whole cell has to go finally and open up into the root shaft. Are you understanding? So this is why they are called as holocrine. That means the whole cell, if you see here, disintegrates and wholly releases all what it has formed. And what it forms? It forms sebum. Got the idea, right? So now you understand why these glands are being given. Why exactly my hair is oily? It is because of this particular thing, sebum, what has been created, right? So if many things come, why do I have an excessive oily scalp, right? So this sebaceous gland is under the control of our genetics. It is under the control of our personal hygiene. It is under the control of our hormones. It is under the control of stress. Whenever the sebaceous gland again and again will get more and more of these influences, it will keep secreting sebum more. And once the sebum get collected over here, right, this sebum will form small flakes. And what is that flake called as? That flake is given the name as dandruff. Simple. So you must be thinking, when I'm stressed out, when I'm in cold, why do I get dandruff more? This is the reason. Because the oily secretion is more. And similarly, when you see some people who have a very dry scalp, what do you mean by a dry scalp? Dry scalp means that your sebaceous secretions are less. And that is why the oily secretions are not having, and you are having a very dry and scaly scalp, right? This is why dandruff happens. This is what the difference between a dry scalp as well as a dandruff-related scalp. Now you understood, right? So now this wholly summarizes what exactly the hair is, okay? And what exactly the whole concept of skin is, and how exactly these glands are working when it comes to skin surface, right? So now we'll move on straight away to our clinical scenario section, and I'll get in Ryan sir for taking part in the rounds, the word rounds as we are going to happen, and what exactly the clinical scenarios can be from the integumentary system. Over to you, Ryan sir.
Yeah, so thank you, sir, Dr. Sanchit, for that wonderful lecture on skin. I think you've made it really easy for the students. And let's see how enthusiastic they are now to solve some clinical problems based on what you just taught them. So we'll move to the first question directly.
Yeah.
So which of the following layers of the epidermis is usually absent in hairy skin? So is it stratum basale, stratum corneum, stratum granulosum, and stratum spinosum? So I'll bring in Dr. Aishwarya also here so that she can help us coordinate with the answering of the questions.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. Guys, it's answering time. Over to you guys. You can just raise your hands if you have an answer, or you can even comment in the comment section. Please feel free to comment in the comment section. What happened to you today? There are no answers. Come on.
Come on. So you have a person with a hairy skin. What do you think? Which layer can be absent? Just to confuse you, these MCQs have been created.
And this point was explained also by Dr. Sanchit. He mentioned a layer. I have not given that particular layer. I have given the neighboring layer. So if you are paying attention to what he was saying, he has mentioned both the layers.
All of you, even the mic access is provided. You can unmute yourself and speak out your answers as well. I can't find any answers. Come on.
Anyone can give it a try.
Yes, we have them, sir. So Kutsia has answered as option 3 and Pratik has answered as option 4. So would you like to bring them in?
Yes, I think we will bring the person who has answered option 3 first.
Okay. So Kutsia, can you just unmute yourself here? Hello?
So by the time she comes online, I think if you remember what Dr. Sanchit told you, that there are 2 layers that are very well developed in thick skin, usually non-hairy skin seen in the palms and even soles of the foot. And they are the stratum granulosum and the stratum lucidum. So on the contrary, when it is thin hairy skin, the 2 layers that are not well developed are stratum granulosum and stratum lucidum. The first option is actually stratum lucidum. If that option is not there and stratum granulosum is given, then you answer as stratum granulosum. And by chance, if both the options are given, stratum granulosum and stratum lucidum, and you're asked to choose only one, then you go for stratum lucidum.
Fine. So I think that is self-explanatory, and as rightly said, you have to see the options, and out of the best, you have to select the most nearby option, because these are the things that will be confusing you, right? Okay. And now we go to the next one.
And Pratik's stratum spinosum is there in hairy skin, thin hairy skin. Again, I think Dr. Sanchit has explained that very well, so I won't go into detail. So we'll move on to the next one. We are learning about the different layers of the skin in first year anatomy, so that when a pathology comes like this in final year, which looks very scary, might look very scary to you now, but in your final year, you slowly get used to seeing these sort of images. So a 40-year-old farmer presented to the OPD with an ulcer in the lower lip that is gradually increasing in size in 6 months. He underwent what is called as an edge biopsy, where a piece of tissue was removed from the edge of this ulcer. Later on, you'll come to know why it is removed from the edge, not from the center. But for now, when piece was removed from the edge of the ulcer, and the pathologist has seen it under the microscope and said that it is squamous cell carcinoma. Now, what we want to know from you is, which layer of the skin does this cancer or malignancy arise from? Is it stratum basal, stratum spinosum, stratum corneum, and stratum lucidum?
So we have Samreen with an answer. Stratum basal is her answer.
Yes, any other answers?
Come on, guys. Keep answering if you have a different answer, or if you join with Samreen with her answer. Yeah, someone Kutsia has said stratum basal as the answer, option 1.
Okay. So I think the general consensus is stratum basal. I would like to bring Dr. Sanchit here. Again, I think it was well explained, and we spoke about stratum basal having cuboidal cells, columnar cells, the layer above that being stratum spinosum. The answer here, when we are talking about squamous cell carcinoma, is stratum spinosum, because the keratinocytes, the cells that produce keratin, are present in that stratum spinosum, and that is the one which is responsible for producing squamous cell carcinoma. Both of you, I'm sorry, what are the names of the ones who answered?
Samreen and Anjum.
Samreen and Anjum, it will make sense now when we go to another case scenario where your answer will be right. Right now, I'm telling you that your answer will be right for a scenario which is coming later. So remember, there are later on you'll come to know that there are different skin malignancies known as squamous cell carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma, melanoma. So now you know that squamous cell carcinoma comes from stratum spinosum. Then there is basal cell carcinoma, and then there is melanoma. Obviously, melanoma is something that is related to melanin. So we'll discuss that. Yes. Next question. We'll move on to the next question. So you are assisting thyroidectomy, and a surgeon gives you the opportunity. You are probably just hanging around there for your early clinical exposure, and some surgeon kind enough tells you, come scrub it, and I'll allow you to put an incision on the neck. Such a big surgery, thyroidectomy, and you as a first year student get a chance. Obviously, he's not going to directly ask you to put an incision. He will actually show you where you have to place the incision, because he's worried about the scar healing well. He will obviously do a good job about the thyroid. Once you do the good job about removing the thyroid, what the patient is worried about is the scar. Oh, I need a good scar, should not show any scarring, too much of scarring tissue there. So which layer of this scar is responsible for the natural cleavage lines in the skin? So is it stratum corneum, papillary layer, reticular layer, stratum basal? And already I can see answers pouring in. And the answer, both the answers given, I think Dr. Aishwarya can read out the names of the ones who
We have Samreen who answered reticular layer first, followed by Hiba as well as Rudena. Both of them joined with Samreen with the answer.
Yes, so all the three of you are right. The answer is reticular layer. And this reticular, now stratum corneum and stratum basal are part of the epidermis. The papillary layer and reticular layer are a part of the dermis. So it is the dermis which is responsible for these natural cleavage lines, also known as Langhans lines, the natural tension lines in the body. So since in this reticular layer, the collagen fibers, remember the dermis is made up of connective tissue which has collagen fibers, and these collagen fibers are arranged nicely in a smooth pattern, such that these tend to form the natural tension lines in the body. For example, in the lower limb, it will be along the long axis of the lower limb. In the neck and in the chest, it is transverse. So putting an incision in these lines will help in the scar, the incision, the wound to heal well with minimal scarring. On the other hand, on that neck there, you place an incision perpendicularly, then that scar will tend to heal very badly compared to the ones which are placed along the Langhans tension lines. So even in your skin, whether it is your hand, whether it is your neck, you can just pinch your skin and see which are the natural tension lines in the skin. It will be visible to yourself, so that you will know in which direction the lines are going. So that is the third case scenario. We'll move on to the fourth case scenario.
Yeah.
So for the ones who already answered this, I hope now you know a 67-year-old presented with an ulcer below the left eye, which is present since 3 months. Over the 3 months period, the ulcer size didn't increase, but the depth went on increasing. It started eating up the tissue, such that the subcutaneous tissue and then the bone also went in. He underwent an edge biopsy again. Like I told you, whenever there is a malignancy, we think of a biopsy from the edge, which showed features of basal cell carcinoma. Which layer of the skin does this malignancy arise from?
I think they have already answered this.
Yeah, so since you have already answered, now you know that different malignancies in the skin, like squamous cell carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma, melanoma, arise from different parts of the skin, and that is why studying the anatomy becomes so important. You might think to remember, why should you remember the mnemonic? Come, let's get sunburned. And remember these layers. It is because of this, when a malignancy comes, it should strike you immediately. Oh, it is coming from this layer.
So whoever
Yes.
got confused with that epithelium, if always remember, cancer is something which occurs in rapidly dividing cells. They are
Yes.
below the living cells. Okay. Above layers are dead, as I already told you. So it cannot arise from something which is dead, because that doesn't possess a nucleus. It has to be below. Spinosome, basal. These are the two actively dividing layers which have these kind of stem cells. And these are the ones which proliferate above and they form a cancerous outgrowth. Right. Okay. I think we'll move on to the next one. Yeah.
So a 19-year-old girl developed whitish patches around her lips, which then gradually progressed to involve her face and the neck in the next 1 year. She went on to consult a dermatologist who diagnosed her to have vitiligo. So which layer of the skin is responsible for this? Stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum basal.
Anyone? Think.
So
Something which is very dark is becoming something which is very white. That is what is called as vitiligo.
Dr. Sanchit explained this in great detail. So I'm happy to see Samreen answering first. So yeah, yes, Samreen, that is the right answer. And like Dr. Sanchit explained, the cells in the basal layer, that is the lowermost layer, and the adjoining stratum spinosum, they tend to have this pigment called as melanin. In last class, we discussed about melanin producing cells known as melanocytes. So it is the stratum basal that is present. Some books will also tell you that it is between the junction of the dermis and the epidermis. Now, the junction between the dermis and the epidermis again is the stratum basal. It can go up to the stratum spinosum, which are the two living cell areas of the skin. So the answer is stratum basal. Yes. So we'll move on to the next case scenario.
Vitiligo, just don't confuse. It is nothing but just the melanin is less. It's not getting produced. Yes. That is why these patches are getting white. Right. So melanocytes where they cell. So it all makes sense once you know the cell and where it is.
So we spoke about aging, anti-aging. So an anti-aging cream company is promising to get rid of skin wrinkles from the face by their latest technology. So which layer of the skin are they targeting now? Is it the epidermis? Is it the dermis, the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous tissue? Yes, I can see the answer. Samreen,
Rudayana also, Heba also.
Heba, and somebody in between answer.
Rudayana.
Yes, Dr. Sanchit, if you can read out the name, we'll acknowledge
Rudayana, Samreen and Heba have answered dermis.
Yes, and all three of you all are right. If any one of you can just switch on the mic, since only both of us are talking, and explain why did you answer dermis?
You can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
I think it is dermis because the reticular layer of the dermis has the collagen fibers, and maybe they are targeting the collagen fibers.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yes. So the reticular layer of the dermis has both collagen as well as elastic fibers. Like you said, the elastic fibers are more in number, and it is the elastic fibers are the ones that as age progresses, they tend to lose elastic fibers, they tend to lose their elasticity, and hence those wrinkles start developing. So they are targeting the dermis. In particular, they are targeting the elastic fibers. Yes, collagen fibers are also there, but the target here, since the elastic fibers are losing their elasticity, leading to the formation of wrinkles, the answer is elastic fibers in the dermis. So more important, I want you to know, concentrate on not the fibers that are responsible, but the layer, and that is the dermis. Yes. We'll move on to the seventh one. So now direct memory from what was told, nicely explained the function of each cell. So the specialized sensory cells in the stratum basale are called as Langerhans cells, Merkel cells, fibroblast cells, melanin cells. Summarin says Merkel cells.
Yeah, so I think Heba has also answered, Sabrina has also answered.
Okay, and again, Merkel cells are concerned with sensory touch. Langerhans cells are more with infections like viral infections. Fibroblast cells we know are responsible for secreting the collagen fibers and also elastic and reticular fibers. And melanin cells, they secrete, they are nothing but melanocyte. They are responsible for the pigmentation of the skin. Yes, we'll go to the question 8. A 63-year-old male patient, you'll see this often in a surgery ward once you are posted there, had an ulcer on the foot and underwent what is called as a split skin graft. There is a word graft is missing there. So split skin graft, there are two types of graft, full thickness skin graft, split skin graft. And that skin was removed from the thigh and used to cover the wound on the foot. What are the layers of the skin that are removed while performing this graft? Part of the epidermis, entire epidermis only, entire epidermis and part of the dermis. Fourth option, epidermis, dermis, and subcutaneous tissue. So Heba has answered entire epidermis only. So that in that image, you can see one slightly different colored skin with the holes there. That is nothing but the skin graft. That graft has been removed. That is our own patient. Graft has been removed from the thigh and placed on the ulcer there. So any other answers? So like I said, there are two types of skin grafts, that is partial thickness graft and full thickness graft. Partial thickness graft is also known as split skin graft. Whenever we talk about split skin graft, remember this till your final year now, we are talking about whole of the epidermis and part of the dermis. The right answer here is entire epidermis and part of the dermis. When you're talking about full thickness graft, you're talking about epidermis and dermis completely. No subcutaneous tissue. Then later there'll be something called as flap, where you'll talk about epidermis, dermis, subcutaneous tissue, and muscle. So split skin graft is entire epidermis. The split skin graft is entire epidermis and part of the dermis. Full thickness graft is entire epidermis and entire dermis. Flap involves epidermis, dermis, subcutaneous tissue, and muscle. Yes. Next question. So dermis is made up of, what does that dermis actually is made up of? Epithelial tissue, connective tissue, basement membrane, adipose tissue. Yes, again, Samreen is fastest.
Samreen and Anjum both have answered connective tissue.
Yeah, Anjum. So like we discussed today and in the last class, the dermis is made up of connective tissue. The connective tissue is nothing but three components: fibers, cells, and ground substance. Rudena also has answered. The fibers are collagen fibers, reticular fibers, and elastic fibers. Cells are the cells which are present in the connective tissue and the cells which comes from elsewhere, and the ground substance made up of proteoglycans and glycosaminoglycans. And the last question for the day is just like a revision. Identify the layer that has been covered by that blue color. This is just a revision of today's day. So somebody answered stratum granulosum, and that is the right answer.
I would just add, can you tell me why these granulosum is granulosum? What is the granule inside? Anyone tell that? Anyone who can name the granule that are present in granulosum? Anyone can recap that name? It is called as keratohyalin granules. Don't forget that. Keratohyalin granules are the granules inside which create that keratin, and that gets aggregated inside. So that is why that granulosum appears to be granular. Right. So granulosum is the right answer.
So that brings us to the end of another session, another lecture, another quiz. I think I will hand it over to Aishwarya now.
Yes, sir, already. Thank you so much, both of you, for such an insightful session on this topic. And to my dear students, I hope you also had a great session today with all these classes as well as the ward rounds we did today. And to be very precise on the topic, we actually took the topic of skin and fascia today, but we didn't want to keep you, you know, like here for such a long time, as well as each topic requires the discussion which it is actually required to be going into what extent it is supposed to be. So we thought of doing the session of fascia in the next session. So this Friday we'll be coming back with a session on fascia. You can have a, you know, have your reading from your textbooks on superficial fascia, deep fascia, and all those things, and come, so that we'll have the session on that particular topic and have few quizzes as well. So until then, have a nice time, and thank you so much, both Ryan sir and Sanjit sir, for today's session, and wish you all a very happy Republic Day from the whole team of Dr. Polaris. Until then, see you all. Good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.